Coronation Street for Monday, July 14. A storm threatens to turn lives upside down and expose long-buried secrets. At the center of the storm is Lou, a woman who appears to be leaving Weatherfield, but is far darker than she appears. It all began when Gary Windus mysteriously vanished. No one knew where he'd gone. Maria was frantic, trying to contact him, growing more desperate with each passing hour. The last person reported to have seen Gary was Lou, but she claimed he'd simply walked off after a tense exchange. Her story was shaky, and her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear every time someone mentioned Gary's name. But Lou knew how to deflect attention, how to slide beneath suspicion. What no one realized was that her plan had already been set in motion long before Gary went missing. Lou had arrived in Weatherfield under the pretense of rebuilding her life, but beneath her polished exterior lay motives steeped in revenge. Her charm, her composed demeanor, were all part of an elaborate performance. She knew about Gary's past, about the things he had done to protect his family, and she knew Maria's weak spots too. Lou hadn't just come to town to make amends. She came to destroy what Gary loved most. Her plan had many layers. The first was to fracture the trust between Maria and Gary. She sowed seeds of doubt, bringing up Gary's past deeds in casual conversations, knowing Maria was already fragile. When she discovered Maria's uncertainty about their future, she leaned in, quietly encouraging her doubts. Then, she made her move. Gary had grown suspicious. Something about Lou didn't sit right with him. He followed her one night, trying to uncover whatever secrets she was hiding. But Lou anticipated this. The moment Gary confronted her, demanding answers, she struck, not physically at first, but with words, accusations, dark truths twisted from Gary's own history. He snapped. The confrontation escalated. And then, something snapped in Lou too. No one knew what happened in the alley behind the factory that night. But by morning, Gary was gone, and Lou was limping. What Lou didn't anticipate, however, was the aftermath. She hadn't intended for Gary to survive, but survive he did. And in the chaos, something shifted. The reality of what she had done began to weigh on her. She couldn't abandon him, not yet. So instead of leaving Weatherfield as planned, Lou smuggled Gary into a disused ward at the hospital, a place few remembered existed. Save for one overworked nurse, she managed to manipulate. There, she tended to him in secret, feeding him, checking his vitals, praying he wouldn't wake up and ruin everything. And then came Mick. His prison break sent shockwaves through the community, but what looked like a spur-of-the-moment escape had been meticulously calculated. Lou and Mick had been in contact for months. Their bond was forged in shared secrets and mutual hatred for Gary. It was no coincidence that Mick appeared in Weatherfield just as Gary vanished. The plan was to finish what Lou had started. But things were beginning to unravel. Nina, haunted by flashes of memory she didn't understand, started to piece together what she had witnessed. She'd seen something the night Gary disappeared. Shadows, a struggle, someone bleeding. At first, it was only fragments, but the pieces began to click into place. As her memories returned, so did the horror of what she had seen. She wasn't sure who had attacked Gary, but Lou's name kept echoing in her mind. Her intuition screamed that Lou was involved. Meanwhile, Gary's subconscious was fighting. Trapped between awareness and oblivion, his body remained still, but his mind roared with memories of the alley, of Lou's eyes narrowing before everything went dark. He saw Maria's face and reached out to her in dreams, willing himself to wake up, to speak, to tell the truth. Then Kit was attacked. Mick found him alone, vulnerable. The assault was brutal. Kit fought back, but Mick was too strong, too furious. Hospitalized with a concussion and several fractured ribs, Kit was expected to be out of commission for weeks. But while recovering, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about the hospital didn't add up. One night, restless and dazed from painkillers, Kit wandered into the wrong corridor. It was a wing rarely used, filled with shadows and silence. That's when he saw her, Lou, slipping into a room with a sense of urgency. Kit paused, heart racing. Something was wrong. He crept closer. And there, in the dim light of a private room, he saw him. Gary. Pale, unconscious, bandaged, but unmistakably alive. Kit staggered back, mind reeling. Lou turned and saw him, her expression freezing mid-action. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lou whispered, he was going to destroy everything. I had no choice. But the choice had been hers all along. And now, it was out of her hands. Kit reported the discovery immediately. The police were called. Lou was arrested at dawn. Her defiance cracked as she was led away in handcuffs. Her perfect plan lay in ruins. But the story wasn't over yet. Mick, enraged by Lou's arrest, tried to flee. But the net had already tightened around him. He was caught trying to break into the hospital again, hoping to silence Gary for good. This time, there was no escape. Gary was transferred to intensive care. Maria wept by his side, begging him to return. Her love, her guilt, her belief in him all spilled into the room. And for the first time, Gary stirred. His fingers twitched. His eyes fluttered. He whispered a name, Lou. The truth was finally clawing its way to the surface. Nina gave her statement to the police, trembling as she described what she remembered. Her testimony, combined with Kit's discovery, painted a damning picture. But Lou remained silent in her cell. She knew the game was over. Still, a part of her clung to the thought of Mick. The only one who understood. The only one who could still protect her. But the truth doesn't stay buried. And in the halls of justice, Lou and Mick would finally reunite, not in secret meetings or whispered plots, but in adjoining cells, awaiting judgment. Yet, even behind bars, some enemies don't give up so easily. Inside the sterile walls of the police holding cells, Lou sat motionless, eyes fixed on the chipped tile floor beneath her feet. She had rehearsed this moment so many times in her head. A confrontation, an arrest, perhaps even Gary regaining consciousness. But she had never imagined it would all collapse so swiftly, so brutally. The echoes of the officers' boots in the corridor outside were a constant reminder that her time was running out. Still, she refused to speak. Not out of fear, but because words no longer served her. Mick, meanwhile, was far less composed. Separated from Lou by a dozen thick concrete walls, he raged in his cell, fists blooded from pounding against the metal door. His plan had been for freedom, vengeance, and escape, not this. He hadn't expected Lou to be found out so soon, and with Gary alive, everything they had done was now a burning fuse leading to their mutual destruction. Gary's condition had stabilized, though he remained unconscious. Maria never left his side. Her pain was evident in the way she clutched his hand, whispering apologies, reassurances, and fragments of memories she hoped would anchor him to reality. She hadn't known the depth of Lou's manipulation until the pieces began fitting together. The subtle lies, the planted seeds of mistrust, the way Lou always seemed to be there at the right moment to offer support. It had all been part of the illusion. Now, Maria's guilt battled with her hope. Nina's role became more crucial by the day. As her recollections sharpened, she found herself revisiting the alley behind the factory in dreams and waking flashes. The sickening sound of the struggle, the glint of something metallic in Lou's hand, Gary's voice calling out in shock, it had been real. She brought this all to D.S. Swain, her testimony carefully recorded, every detail weighed and examined. But Nina knew this was only the beginning. There was a storm coming, and she was now caught in its center. Kit, recovering steadily, remained under surveillance not only for his protection, but also because his discovery had cracked the case wide open. Despite his injuries, his mind remained sharp. He demanded to be included in every update, insisted on going through Gary's medical charts, timelines, and security footage. Something still didn't sit right with him. Lou was dangerous, yes. But there was a complexity to her actions that he couldn't ignore. Why keep Gary alive? Why hide him in a hospital rather than dispose of him entirely? The answer came slowly, pieced together through interviews, hospital records, and Lou's own behavior. She had faltered. Somewhere between vengeance and execution, her conscience had interfered. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something resembling guilt. Or perhaps it had always been about control. Keeping Gary alive gave her power over him, over Maria, over the truth. But in the end, it had also been her undoing. While police prepared charges, a new mystery emerged. In Lou's flat, during a search, authorities found letters, dozens of them, hidden behind a loose panel beneath the sink. They were addressed to Mick. Some dated back over a year. Plans were sketched, maps drawn, mentions of watching Gary, of studying Maria's routine. But some letters hinted at deeper truths. Lou had connections, someone unnamed who had been feeding her information about Gary's activities long before she arrived in Weatherfield. An accomplice. A ghost in the background. That revelation shifted everything. D.S. Swain launched a secondary investigation, now looking into who else might have been helping Lou. Mick wouldn't speak, but his fury suggested betrayal. He had believed himself to be Lou's only confidant, her only partner. Learning otherwise only pushed him closer to the edge. In the hospital, Gary stirred again. This time, the movement was more pronounced. Maria gasped as his eyes fluttered open. Confusion swept across his face, followed by fear, and then clarity. The nurses rushed in, alarms sounding, but Maria stayed by his side. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse and cracked. Lou. She did it. She tried to kill me. Those words would become the turning point. With Gary able to confirm Lou's involvement, the prosecution had their case. But the broader conspiracy remained unsolved. Who had been whispering into Lou's ear? And why? Kit suggested revisiting Gary's past. Years ago, Gary had made enemies. Dangerous ones. Could this have been payback delayed? Maria feared that the truth might be bigger than any of them could imagine. She begged Gary to rest, but he insisted on telling everything he remembered. The fight, Lou's accusations, the way she knew details no one should have known. It wasn't just about Maria, or even about Gary. It was about something deeper, an old wound reopened. Meanwhile, Lou faced her first court hearing. Dressed in grey, her hair disheveled, she looked nothing like the poised woman who had charmed the street. Her lawyer advised silence. But as she entered the courtroom, her eyes scanned the faces in the crowd. Maria was there, holding back tears. Nina, clutching a folder of her sketches and notes. Kit, leaning on a cane, but glaring with quiet fury. And Gary, in a wheelchair, defiant even in pain. Lou didn't speak. Not even as the charges were read: attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy. She looked only at Mick, seated beside her. There was no warmth in his gaze now, only betrayal. Whatever bond had once existed between them had dissolved into dust. Back in Weatherfield, the community struggled to process what had happened. Trust was fractured. People looked over their shoulders. Questions lingered. Who had been feeding Lou information? Why had she targeted Gary with such precision? And what if the person helping her was still out there? DS Swain released a public statement. The investigation was ongoing. Lou and Mick would be held without bail. But they weren't closing the file. Too many questions remained. Maria, though relieved that Gary was awake, couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles weren't over. Gary, too, felt the shadows lingering. He spoke with Kit privately, asking for protection not for himself, but for Maria. He feared someone might come after her next. Kit agreed. And so, as Lou and Mick sat behind bars, the narrative shifted once more. Not toward closure, but toward the hunt for the unknown figure who had orchestrated part of their plan. A name not yet spoken. A face still hidden. In the quiet of her cell, Lou began to write again. Not letters this time, but confessions. Names. Memories. Her hands shook as she wrote, but her mind was clear. She no longer expected redemption. But she could still offer the truth. Or perhaps, one final manipulation. Because even broken people know how to hurt. And the story of Gary, Maria, Lou, and Mick was not over. Not yet. There was still someone out there. Watching. Waiting. Ready to strike next.